may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, we made a video earlier this offseason where I went through and I did historical research for the tight end position and really tried to do an in-depth analysis based on the past 10 years on when we should be drafting tight ends in fantasy. Because I make the same mistake in fantasy drafts every single offseason, and I did the research at the beginning of the offseason to tell myself not to make that same mistake again. And that mistake is drafting tight ends in the tight end 4 to tight end 10 range. Because historically, what you've wanted to do at the tight end position is you've wanted to either go at the very top and get the guys that are going to be the Travis Kelce, the Darren Waller, the George Kittle, the players that we know exactly what we can expect. They are going to be incredibly productive. But I mean, I am doing it again. I am going through and I am looking at these players like a TJ Hockenson, like a Dallas Goedert, like a Noah Fant, and I'm convincing myself that they are good bets in fantasy this year. So I'm going to make this video talking about all the tight ends in that tier, talk about the guys that I don't like, talk about the players that I may be breaking our own rule and going out there and drafting. But before we dive into it, please, guys, go down there, drop a like on the video. We've been crushing the like button the past few days, and what it's done is it's gotten us recommended to some new listeners where we've actually been getting over 100 subscribers a day. So thank you so much for everybody who continues to show some love down there. And also subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and leave a comment if you have any questions or you drafted any of these tight ends in a recent mock draft or a real draft, and let me know what you were thinking when you drafted them. And yeah, let's dive into this video right now. And I just want to revisit the old research that we did at the beginning of the offseason. And what we decided to do is we broke down the tight end ADP going into the year in 3 different brackets. We looked at it with the top 3 tight ends that were going in fantasy drafts. We looked at it with the tight ends that were mid tight end 1s, guys that were being drafted as the tight end 4 to tight end 9. And we looked at it with the guys that were being drafted at the very end, the tight ends 10 through tight ends 12. And we went through and we tried to do a historical based research on hit rates from those groups. So the guys that were drafted in the top 3 finished either inside the top 3 or right there where they produced value based on where they were being drafted 78% of the time. So that is a significant amount. And guys that were drafted in the tight end 10 to tight end 12 range, they were also good draft picks. I mean, they actually were able to finish as top 12 tight ends or close to it about 67% of the time over the past 10 years. But this group of tight ends that we are about to discuss, this has been the worst bet that you really could make in fantasy drafts. And I mean, I was making it back in the day with OJ Howard back in 2019, with David Njoku back in 2018. I was chasing those tight ends thinking, okay, this is when we change the historical trend. This is when we get the elite guys coming in, the young talents. They are going to be the rule breakers here, and I can draft them confidently because we know how talented they are. Well, those tight ends over the past 10 years that have been drafted from tight end 4 to tight end 9 have hit 33% of the time. That is significantly less than what we had with the elite guys. That's significantly less than what we had with the guys that if you were going to punt the tight end position. So now if we dive into that group and we try to identify the players that in theory we should be avoiding, but I mean, they look so good on paper. I really want to go player by player here, talk about where they're going in fantasy drafts, where the guys that should be completely avoided are, and the players that I think you can actually consider drafting. And now our first player is going to end up being TJ Hockenson. And we are going to go in order from our rankings that are available on our draft guide, which is available right now over on Patreon with our rankings. And yeah, our first guy, TJ Hockenson here, is going to be our tight end 4, I believe, in fantasy drafts after Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Darren Waller. I mean, he is being drafted as the 60th player overall off the board in high-stakes redraft leagues. He is being drafted in a range that has T. Higgins, Kareem Hunt going right before him, and has Mike Davis and Brandon Ayuk going directly after him. And I'm going to say this right away. I think you prefer the wide receivers. I think you prefer the running backs. I think drafting TJ Hockenson is actually going to be a mistake this year, despite him having a fantastic profile. I mean, we go through TJ Hockenson, literally just turned 24 years old. He's 6'5", 251 pounds. He had a decent athletic mark with a 4.70 40-yard dash, and he had great marks really everywhere else on the NFL Combine, and this ended up getting him drafted as the 108 in the 2019 NFL Draft. He was drafted as the 8th player overall, and I mean, tight ends very rarely go inside the top 10, so this kind of tells you exactly how good of a prospect TJ Hockenson was going into the NFL. And if you pull up what he's actually done in fantasy over the past over the past few years, last season, TJ Hockenson finished as the tight end 5 in points per game. And I want to remind everyone that we know that tight ends don't produce right away. We know that tight ends really take a very long time to actually get going. But Hockenson was able to put numbers on the board at 23 years old, which never happens. I mean, you never see a tight end finish as a top 5 option at 23 years old in the NFL. Historically, I mean, it's just a complete unicorn with what we're looking at here in TJ Hockenson. But a big problem is going to be the downgrade at quarterback that we have. So I understand that Hockenson is now in a place after averaging 11 fantasy points per game last year, where you can most likely expect that he's going to be a tight end that's going to see a significant amount of targets. He actually saw almost 6.5 targets his sophomore season. I think that number can get bumped up to possibly 7 targets a game. And that is massive for a tight end. But the problem is, I think the efficiency with the targets are actually going to be really bad, because we know that this is not going to be a great offense. You're not going to have that many trips to the red zone. So I think with Hockenson, it's a little bit too hard to go through and ask us to break the rule here of drafting him ahead of a T. Higgins, ahead of a Brandon Ayuk. I think you actually pass on Hockenson despite him having a very attractive profile. And now a player actually going higher in high stakes redraft leagues, which I don't understand. I have Hockenson ranked higher this upcoming season, so you know I'm not drafting him at all in redraft leagues. It's going to be Kyle Pitts. Okay, so Kyle Pitts, I want to say this right away. He is the best tight end prospect of all time, and it's not even close. Now, usually with these tight ends, when they come in as rookies, you either see two things. You see size and athleticism, or you see production. Very rarely does a tight end possess both elite size and adjusted athleticism and production at a young age. Well, Kyle Pitts comes in. He runs a 4.44 at his pro day. I mean, he is 6'6", 245 pounds, runs a 4.44, and is going to have the longest wingspan in the NFL for a skill positional player. Now, going over to his production, it is not surprising to see why he was drafted as the highest tight end to ever be drafted in the NFL before. I mean, he was actually drafted at the 4th pick overall, which, like I said, you have never seen a tight end go this high in the NFL draft. And if we see where he's going in fantasy drafts right now, he's actually being drafted as the 54th player off the board. He's going directly ahead of Jamar Chase, Tyler Lockett, Myles Gaskin, T. Higgins, Kareem Hunt. I can't get behind that. I mean, he's going directly behind Cooper Kupp, Javonte Williams, Adam Thielen. Well, yes, we can agree. Kyle Pitts is the best tight end prospect of all time. I mean, you go and you look at his production in Florida, and he averages almost 100 receiving yards a game. At 19 years old in the SEC, Kyle Pitts averages almost 100 receiving yards a game. At 19 years old, at the tight end position in the SEC, averages a touchdown and a half a game. You never see any of this. And that's why he's the best tight end prospect of all time. But historically, it's so hard to bet on those rookie tight end prospects coming in and producing right away. So if Kyle Pitts is already being drafted as the wide receiver 4 in fantasy, he's going ahead of TJ Hockenson, who I have ranked higher for this upcoming year. He's going ahead of Myles Gaskin, T. Higgins, Tyler Lockett, Jamar Chase. I can't draft Kyle Pitts ahead of any of those players. So I am going to be lower on Kyle Pitts. I definitely have to mark him as an avoid, even though I understand how good of a prospect he is. The price is just too high. Now we are going to start to get to some cheaper options. We're going to start to get to some players that I think you can actually consider. And Mark Andrews is going to be our next guy. So here with Mark Andrews, I mean, he did take a dip this past year. I expected him to really come through and shine a ton of light on a tight end position that really needed it, because we know Mark Andrews, during the first 2 years of his NFL career, this was a player that was on the same offense that was giving Hayden Hurst and Nick Boyle a ton of targets. So when Mark Andrews got on the field, he was actually historic with the amount of fantasy points that he had per route run. I mean, it's laughable, the amount of efficiency that Mark Andrews had as a sophomore in the NFL. So all of a sudden, you see Hayden Hurst get traded to Atlanta, which opens up a lot more snaps for Mark Andrews. And on top of that, he's going into year 3, and we understand that usually year 3 is when you see the jump at the tight end position. I was expecting this to be a season where Mark Andrews came out and possibly was the tight end 1 overall. Well, it didn't happen. He did see a slight dip down, but he's only 24 years old. And if we look at 2020, he still finished as the tight end 4 in points per game. He had almost 6.5 targets a game. And I think the main thing is, while yes, he was disappointing, I think our expectations were just a little too high for Mark Andrews. And this has caused him to fall compared to the other tight ends in fantasy drafts this year, where you pull it up and he is actually going directly ahead of Chase Edmonds, Odell Beckham Jr., Chase Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster, Cortland Sutton, Trey Sermon. So in that range, Mark Andrews is more intriguing, where I'm not saying that I'm going to be drafting Mark Andrews in every draft. I'm not saying that he's even a draft target for us. But out of the 3 tight ends we have listed so far, I think that Mark Andrews at 67 overall in ADP is a lot better than Kyle Pitts at 54 or TJ Hockenson at 60. So if we are considering any players in this range, I think we actually consider Mark Andrews given the slight discount due to the disappointing season last year, because we have to remember this is a player that was a good athlete coming out of Oklahoma. And while, yes, I was actually too low on him back in that 2018 NFL draft class, I think that you're actually seeing him now be someone that can come out and going into year 4, someone that possibly just took a year too long to take that next leap. The one problem is, and I can't overlook this, is the fact they do bring in Rashad Bateman. They do bring in Tylan Wallace. They do bring in Sammy Watkins. Devin Duvernay and Miles Boykin should both take a step up forward. So there are guys to take targets away from Mark Andrews in this offense. But the thing is, I think if you're betting on Andrews, you're essentially betting on the offense to take a step forward in general. So maybe you only draft Mark Andrews if you can get, just say, Lamar Jackson in the 5th, then you come back in the 6th round, you get Mark Andrews. And that could be a nice way that you just make a bet on the overall Baltimore Ravens offense. So now I think this is where we end up actually breaking the rule for our tight ends. And I think this is actually where we go out and we start targeting these guys. And our first player is going to be Dallas Goedert here. Okay, so with Dallas Goedert, historically, especially in dynasty leagues, I've actually been a lot lower on Dallas Goedert compared to consensus. Because we know that, yes, he was a very impressive rookie in 2018. A lot of people thought you weren't going to see anything from him, and he came out and he looked fantastic with Zach Ertz playing a full-time role. With Zach Ertz being hyper-productive, Dallas Goedert made a name for himself. And in dynasty leagues in particular, all of a sudden, people were jumping up and down. People were claiming that Dallas Goedert was going to be the guy sooner rather than later. And I wanted us to pump the brakes. I saw him being valued as the top 10 tight end already, and I thought it was ridiculous with the Zach Ertz still in town. But what's hilarious is Dallas Goedert is now the same price with Zach Ertz most likely leaving Philadelphia this offseason. And you go through and you go, okay, well, he's entering his age 26 season. We know that this is probably where you start to see the player peak at the tight end position, where we know a tight end is more of an old man's game compared to running back or a wide receiver. It's going to take him a little bit of time to go through and develop. And right now, he is being drafted at a very affordable price. He's being drafted directly behind Robbie Anderson and Tom Brady, directly ahead of Jerry Jeudy, Michael Carter, Melvin Gordon, Raheem Mostert, and Devonta Smith. So at 77 overall, I actually think that Dallas Goedert is someone that I could go out there and I could target in these drafts, because you have seen a consistent upgrade across the board for Dallas Goedert. Since his rookie season, he has increased his targets a game, he has increased his receiving yards a game, increased his positional finish on a per game basis every single year. This past season, he was the tight end 8 in points per game. And you actually had Zach Ertz seeing more targets than Dallas Goedert on a per game basis, yet Dallas Goedert was significantly more productive than Zach Ertz because he's a better tight end. Because we know Zach Ertz is washed, Dallas Goedert is in his prime. Zach Ertz is leaving, opening up a lot of targets on this offense. And now I'm not necessarily saying that Jalen Hurts is going to be a great passing quarterback. I love Jalen Hurts in fantasy because his rushing production. But maybe because Jalen Hurts is slightly limited as a passer, you could potentially see him looking more so over the middle of the field to Dallas Goedert with checkdowns compared to Devonta Smith or Jalen Reagor on the sides. So maybe it's actually a natural fit here with Dallas Goedert and Jalen Hurts. So I would definitely take the discount there. And another discount that I think we'll be willing to take and will be willing to break our rule for is going to be Noah Fant. Okay, so here with Noah Fant, this is a player that played on the same team as TJ Hockenson back in college. And I don't know how many people watching this video play Devy fantasy football, but it's actually where you roster players while they're in college until they get to the NFL. And back then, when both Noah Fant and TJ Hockenson were at Iowa, what was really funny is Noah Fant was the name that everybody knew. Noah Fant was the guy that you wanted until their final season at Iowa when TJ Hockenson jumped him. But Noah Fant's been on the radar for a very long time. And the reason's very easy to see. This is a player that's in the 99th percentile in his 40-yard dash time. Literally elite speed at the tight end position. You also see that he's only 23 years old. He's 6'4", 249 pounds. I mean, he was a fantastic prospect. He got drafted with the 20th overall pick in the 2019 NFL draft class, and he's been very impressive in his first 2 years in the NFL. I mean, his first season in the NFL, he actually went out there and he averaged 35 receiving yards a game. And then his second year, he bumped that up to 45 receiving yards a game, getting more targets per game, and he finished as the tight end 11. But a big thing that's not showed with that tight end 11 finish is Noah Fant actually got very unlucky with touchdowns. He only scored 0.20 touchdowns per game, which is a very low number for the amount of targets that he was seeing with his size-adjusted athleticism. Naturally, you would expect this touchdowns per game number to regress in the positive direction. And if that's happening, I think that Noah Fant can see a boom in fantasy. Now, the one issue is, I mean, there are going to be a lot of players taking targets away. You're going to have both Courtland Sutton and you're going to have both Jerry Jeudy in this offense, KJ Hamler there as well. And it's going to be a very bad offense in general. But if we are talking about Noah Fant, who right now is being drafted as the 102nd player off the board, I think that's a great price where you can actually go out there and pay. I mean, he is being drafted directly behind Matthew Stafford, Deebo Samuel, Ryan Tannehill, and Ronald Jones. And he's being drafted directly ahead of Damian Harris, Leonard Fournette, Joe Burrow, and Will Fuller. So I think Noah Fant, compared to all these other tight ends, is definitely going to be the best value bet that you can have because you're not going to have to be passing up on an elite level wide receiver. And in the case of Noah Fant, I mean, I think that he's in a position where he can take that year 3 jump, especially if we get an upgrade at quarterback for the Denver Broncos. But if he doesn't, I can't lie to you, it's going to be hard just because of the target competition there. But I'd definitely rather be drafting Noah Fant right now than Jerry Jeudy or Courtland Sutton because I'm going to expect that their volume may be similar. Noah Fant, we know, is playing at a harder position to find volume, and at the same time, he's coming at a cheaper drop price. Now, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, if y'all did, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And if you have not already, I mean, go over there, check out our 2021 fantasy football guide. Right now, if you're watching this video, I'm most likely moving our studio from Austin, Texas to Tampa, Florida. So maybe it's going to take me a little bit of time to respond to you over there on Patreon, but shoot me that DM right away and I'll try to get to you ASAP. And yeah, that's all I got for you, my dudes. And have a great day. We've gotten a ton of new members joining the flock. Thank you, Grind for Gold, Devin, Bungified, Brian, Brody, Victor, Chris, Grant, Trevor, and David. Thank you, my dudes.